Kalimera. And thank you very much for that introduction. Keynote is something to live up to. I'm not sure that I'll be able to do it, but I will try. My name is Boris Cheshikov. I am the UNHCR spokesperson in Athens, Greece, UNHCR being the UN Protection Agency for Refugees, the UN Refugee Agency. It's an interesting date that you've chosen, 21st of June, because 20th of June, just yesterday, is World Refugee Day. It's a day that every year we mark to show the courage, the resilience, the bravery of refugees that have been forcefully displaced all around the world, and it's an unprecedented time. Again, for the 7th year running, it's an unprecedented time. The global displacement number is now, for the first time in recorded history, more than 70 million people. You can imagine, and it's a handful of countries, Syria, Afghanistan, Somalia, Sudan, now Venezuela, that are contributing to that number. But they are not in Greece, they're not in the European Union, at least not the majority of them. More than 80% are in a country neighboring their native country. So with that caveat, I would like to start. I have my notes. I will refer to them at some point. I will try to set the mood a little bit because my area of expertise is communications. It's not specifically interpretation and translation, although I have had my own personal experiences in interpreting, and I can tell you being an amateur is not easy. Sometimes it can be a very stressful situation, which, however, requires you to compose yourself. So that I won't touch on, but I would like to thank the organizers for inviting UNHCR. I would like to thank the Center for Public Administration and Local Government for hosting this very interesting event. And without further ado, I won't go into techniques, into different criteria. I won't go into the process. I won't speak about the various institutions of state in Greece that have been involved in the response, but I will focus on a small segment of the refugee response in this country. Now, I came first, maybe this will be interesting background before I start. I came to Greece from my native Bulgaria in the autumn of 2015. It was a time when we were seeing thousands of people reaching in small boats several Aegean islands, Greek Aegean islands, Lesbos, Chios, Samos, Kos, Leros, a handful of others receiving smaller numbers. That was in 2015. And I would like to take you back to that time just for one moment. Things have changed. The Greek state, the Greek authorities have taken charge of the situation, but at that time they were facing many shortages. So let me set the scene a little bit for you and take you on a mental journey. We're going to a beach on a Greek island. It is Friday. We're now starting the summer period, but this is not the focus that I want to give you. This beach is set in the south of Lesbos Island in the winter of 2015. And it's biting cold, it's daybreak, there's a piercing wind, the waves are high, you're right at the shore, alongside you are maybe 20 people, just like you. Let's call these people for the moment the humanitarian response. And you are charging towards the sea because 3 gray inflatable boats are just about to make landfall. And you can see on these 3 boats, packed with 50 people each, various individuals, various ages. You have half of them appear to be adults. Some of them are elderly. Half of them are children. Some are infants, clearly in their mother's arms. And what you will soon find out is that they are coming from Syria, recent fighting in Syria, recent fighting in Iraq, recent trouble in Afghanistan. Just a small handful are coming from other countries, from Iran, from Pakistan, from Algeria, from Morocco, from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, from Bangladesh, some are from Sri Lanka, but the majority are coming from Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Now, many of them speak only their own language. They only speak the dialect of Arabic. the Farsi, the Dari, the Pashto, the Bengali. Some of them have rudimentary knowledge of English. Others are fluent. There's a professor from Kabul who speaks incredibly sophisticated King's English. Some are able to communicate only with what they have from the Sinjar Mountains and the very specific dialect that they were born with and acquired soon after. Now, they've been on the water for about 3.5 hours in these conditions. They are soaked, they're freezing cold, most of them are in shock. Some of them have passed out from hypothermia, from suffocation, because these are boats not much larger than 3 of these lecterns and usually made for about 7 or 8 people. Some of them have pain. You see a man who is maybe in his 50s clutching his heart. Later you'll find out that he is Kurdish Iraqi. You see a woman who looks, maybe, I have a grandmother, bless her, she's 94 years old. I hope she lives to at least to be 100. But this woman is somewhere about that age. You'll find out later that she's Yazidi, that she's traveling alone, and that she's 91 years old. Also on this boat, you have 3 teenagers and 1 5-year-old boy, all of whom are on their own. There are also 2 pregnant women, one of which is in pain. Both are in their last trimester. Beside you, the humanitarian response charging the shore as these boats are imminently arriving. You have amateur and professional volunteers and humanitarians, Spanish lifeguards, German lifeguards, Greek lifeguards, Norwegian lifeguards. You have a Dutch doctor volunteer, you have a Palestinian doctor, you have an Israeli doctor, you have a psychologist from Sweden, you have many Greek locals who are there with bags of dry clothes, with bottles of water. Some have hot tea ready. And for many, they've never experienced work with refugees. And for some, this is their first day on the shores of Lesbos. They arrived just the previous night. There's also a UNHCR staff member, just to color it a little bit and give UNHCR a role. This humanitarian response is now dealing with the boat. The next moments are chaotic. Those people on the boat are getting off. The lifeguards are stabilizing the boat. You have people who are making corridors so that there's a safety. Most of these humanitarians, at least in the morning briefing, have been told, if you say shway shway, shway shway, people will probably understand, calm down, slowly, slowly. If you say wahad wahad, wahad wahad, they will understand one by one, but that's basically the level of communication, the level of sophistication that you have at this moment. Babies are being passed off the boat, volunteers are holding them in their arms, and they will be soon reunited with their parents, but it's not a given. Then you have others, the volunteers that are setting up blankets on the shore. There people will be able to rest, some of them will be carried over because they need urgent medical attention. The girl on the boat who is unconscious from hypothermia is going to be taken by ambulance. One of the doctors is calling in. The ambulance is on its way. There are 3 buses that the UNHCR officer has called, which will soon take these people, once they settle down, to a 30-minute ride to the Moria Reception and Identification Center. This is where they will be registered by the Greek authorities, and from there on, this is, remember, 2015, so still a transient movement. At that time, just in the span of a few months, 1 million people moving into the heart of Europe. Now, before they get on the bus, they start asking questions. Where am I? How do I get to Germany? How long will I stay? Where can I charge my phone? Is there internet that I can connect to? Because my family is waiting for me to tell them that I'm okay. And most of this is done with gestures and single words. Among the humanitarian response, some speak Arabic, or at least one of the dialects of Arabic. As you know, we now know shway shway and wahad wahad, so we're on our way to becoming fluent. Communication is extremely difficult, but at the same time, you have major needs. Some of these people are with an abuser. They're traveling with a trafficker. Most of them have no clue about the accurate information of what lies ahead, what procedures follow, what does the Greek state have in store in terms of asylum process, how are they going to continue, because most are trying to reunite with family members. A number of them are traveling on their own. They are not aware of these procedures. They rely on the rumors that have been fed to them by the smugglers and what they have read on social media, one of the most reliable sources of news as we know. So I won't go into more of this process. We won't follow them onto the bus. We won't be with them in Moria, where they will have to go through a protection and medical triage, where they will register, where they will give biometric data, where some of them might start their asylum process, where they will be queuing for food distribution, for aid item distribution. They'll go through shelter allocation, where they will find out how to move with one of the next ferries, maybe in a couple of days, once they've gone through a registration process, which at that time meant queuing for about 48 hours. Get on a ferry, go to Athens, board a bus, get to Idomeni, walk across the border, and from there, you've all seen the news. Let's not go into them. And plus, I'm sure that we'll come back to this later in the day. So this was the scene that I wanted to paint. It's a different story in 2019. We're seeing continued arrivals, but yesterday we had 200, the day before we had 350. It's not 10,000 in a single day, and this was the reality of Lesbos in 2015. People are staying. We heard from already that Greece is becoming a destination country. Greece is handling, by the way, this is an interesting footnote, Germany, France, Greece with 65,000 asylum applications last year. If we look at it per capita, Greece then climbs to the top of that. So the sophisticated procedures which need to be run, the neutrality, the confidentiality, all these things come to the forefront. And this is where we now get to the role of the interpreter. Now, in an ideal setting, and I think this encompasses not just the critical moments, that humanitarian emergency aspect, which you have to act and you have to rely sometimes on technology. You can imagine the success that we had with Google Translate and a number of apps that existed. UNHCR had at the time in the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, as it was known then, Republic of North Macedonia as it is known now, an app on the Balkans route called Translation Cards. It was a set of quite regular responses to most of the questions that were after a poll that UNHCR and partners were receiving at the time, in a language that we assumed people would understand. Obviously, we didn't know on a boat before it arrived how many languages we would need. In an ideal setting, you would have a pool of trained professional interpreters. You would know which languages and dialects are required. You would know which gender is required. We're still dealing with a high number of sexual violence cases on the Greek Aegean islands. Matters of confidentiality, informal interpreters. What about relying on a family or a friend, or a family member or friend, or someone from the community? What if this member of the community, we have to know these things, and it's not so easy. We have to know, what if this person is from an ethnicity that causes the person that you're interviewing distress or discomfort or distrust? What about their gender if there's a sensitivity? So at that time, it was very easy to be lost in translation. It is still very easy to be lost in translation. Greece has quite a sophisticated and well-developed system where interpreters are being provided through the state response, through NGOs. UNHCR has several partners. Metadrasi, you may have heard of this organization. I hope you have. Some of you might be part of their team, Meta Action. They have a wonderful service that we rely on every day in the field. It's a life-saving service. It can be the difference between life and death. So with that, I would rather open up for questions. Without going into maybe specific techniques, although I'm happy to respond, I've prepared myself for your questions. So thank you.
Any questions? Any area or related area? Please, yeah, Fotis. Is it on?
Ακούγομαι, μάλιστα. Ωραία. Καλημέρα.
Καλημέρα.
Έχουμε τους εξαιρετικούς διερμηνείς, οπότε θα ρωτήσω...
Μισό λεπτάκι, Φωτής, παρακαλώ. Συγγνώμη, δεν μιλάω ελληνικά. Καταλαβαίνω πολύ λίγο. Yes, yes I can. Thank you.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ καταρχάς τους διοργανωτές που μας δίνεται αυτή η ευκαιρία να συζητήσουμε αυτά τα ζητήματα που είναι πραγματικά πολύ σημαντικά. Μια ερώτηση για τον κεντρικό μας ομιλητή. Αναφερθήκατε, κύριε Τσέσερκοφ, σε ένα εξαιρετικό σύστημα που έχει πλέον, που διαθέτει η Ελλάδα για την κάλυψη των αναγκών σε μετάφραση και διερμηνία. Μπορείτε παρακαλώ να το περιγράψετε λίγο πιο λεπτομερώς, και δεν εννοώ μόνο αυτούς που χρηματοδοτεί άμεσα το Δημόσιο Ταμείο, αλλά και όλους τους παράγοντες όπως είναι η Πατιαρμοστία και άλλοι, οι οποίοι διαθέτουν από δικούς τους πόρους μια δεξαμενή επαγγελματιών ή μη επαγγελματιών. Αν μπορείτε να μας το περιγράψετε λίγο περισσότερο. Ευχαριστώ.
Oh. I've turned it off. That was, yes, Fotis, thank you. We have to start with the state response and what is being provided. Now, in Greece, the majority of the resources that have come to the country are given by the European Commission. This is still true. And much of that has to do with material resources, directly with funds, but also with the support from EU institutions, Frontex being one, EASO, the European Asylum Support Office, being the other. In both cases, their staff, with their pool of interpreters, are assisting the Greek state. For instance, Frontex, from the very start, helps in the registration phase, once people arrive, when their data is taken, during the registration and identification process. At the same time, EASO is providing support to the Greek Asylum Service. From there, we also go into the different arms of the Ministry of Migration Policy. In the case of the so-called hotspots, officially the Reception Identification Centers, RIS, the Reception Identification Service, relies on a pool of interpreters that are tendered for. And we can go into the gaps that exist, because there are such, especially for rare languages, and this can cause delays in the asylum process, can also cause delays in the registration. But there is a pool, and they have the numbers that are required for each location. The different regional asylum offices are staffed with external service providers, but with interpreters in a variety of languages. We have obviously, the obvious case is Persian and Arab dialects, Farsi, Pashto, Dari, Kurmanji and Surani are two languages commonly spoken by the people who come into Greece. We have in some areas, for instance, Samos, a high number of French speakers. The Democratic Republic of the Congo has become one of the main countries of origin in the last couple of years. At the same time, you have other needs as well. You have needs for the population. And in Greece, we're talking about, at the present moment, around 80,000 people, both asylum seekers and refugees. Most of them are on the mainland. Half of those who are in state-provided accommodation, the capacity of the state is for around 50,000 people, are in apartments under a program that UNHCR manages. In the majority, it's countrywide, but the majority, let's say, are in the Attica and Central Macedonia regions. You need interpretation to communicate with those who are there. You have 26 mainland sites. These are camp-like facilities run by the Ministry of Migration Policy in cooperation with the International Organization for Migration, for the site management purposes, for cultural mediation, for access to medical services, to various needs that the population has. You require the services of interpreters. If I look at it from the perspective of UNHCR, we also run an additional, in Greece our role has changed over time. The days of 2015 when we were charging the shoreline with volunteers and NGOs are thankfully behind us. But we now focus on monitoring, so protection monitoring. And I purposely wanted to avoid terminology, although this is in the context of interpretation key. But protection monitoring, what does that mean essentially? We want to be able to communicate with the population. We want to find out how they're living, in what conditions, how their procedures are going forward, what are their specific needs. And for that, we need interpreters. Some of our staff are speakers of specific languages, of rare languages, including those of the communities that are here represented. But at the same time, Arabic alone has, and I'm sure that somebody will correct me because you're a group that deals with this every day, at least a dozen dialects spoken in numerous countries. So even if you're an Arab speaker, that's not a guarantee that you'll be able to communicate effectively. What about the quality of information? Because for the moment, my focus has been interpretation, but what about translated documents? What about the digital domain? The refugee population in Greece is receiving a lot of its information from social media platforms, from the internet. So how do you guarantee that consistent, timely information, which can change from 1 week to the other? In the case of 2015, 2016, it was changing almost every day. How do you guarantee that they have access to accurate, factual, realistic, and useful information that they can understand? So here, the quality of interpretation in so many languages is also important. There's a clear correlation between the needs of the different service providers and institutions to communicate effectively, without nuance, without coloring, without personal contribution. One of the things that we often struggle with. But there's also a two-way communication opportunity. What about the questions that people have? So it's not just us and the government of Greece imposing our views on the population. They need to participate in the decisions that are being taken for them. It's also necessary to explain why some interventions are taken but others are neglected. So I think I've gone beyond what you have asked, but there is a system which is multifaceted. State services, some municipalities and municipal programs, those huge reception programs that exist in Greece, Esthia, the one that UNHCR runs with 25,000 places in apartments, and those on the sites. Also on the islands, but I would like to avoid the islands for the moment. Yep.
I think we've time for one more question, yes.
Okay. Yes, I can.
Is that okay now?
Yes.
Right, okay. My name is Fotini Apostolou. I'm an associate professor in the School of English, Aristotle University, and researching in the field of community interpreting for a number of years. I do have objections concerning the system and how it works. I think it's highly deficient in many, many ways. You talked about in your introduction, in your keynote speech, you talked about neutrality, confidentiality, which are basic principles in a code of ethics, in a code of conduct, especially in community interpreting. And of course, these are important factors in training. Now, where is training provided for interpreters? Only NGOs provide training. No state body provides training for community interpreting. We know nothing about the training that is provided by NGOs because it is covered under a veil, very highly secretive. We know nothing about it, and I'm sure you don't. Well, these services are provided. No training for interpreters, or very limited. We know nothing about it. No evaluation of interpreting services. You talked about quality. Quality is a major factor. And I do agree, because the lives of the people depend on it.
Yes.
Their future, the families. So it is a highly deficient field. And I don't know if your organization can do anything beyond funding NGOs, but the state definitely needs to do things. That's what I wanted to say as a comment.
Thank you, Fotini. I think your intervention is very timely and appropriate, and it's true. There are many deficiencies, especially in community interpretation, and even in the context of an asylum interview. Some nationalities, some languages are not available. And some people will have to wait far longer than others just to get their asylum interview, just because of the availability. So that's a different aspect as well. But in terms of not contextualizing, not coloring, not analyzing, not providing commentary, being ethical, being professional, having the capacity, being trained, not being personally affiliated, so many conflicts of interest can arise, especially among someone who's coming from the community. And it's clear that the Greek state has to invest in, this isn't going to stop. Okay, we've gone from 1 million arrivals to 16,000 this year so far. 1.6, excuse my accent. Yes? Yeah, no. Yes, and the 80,000 which I mentioned, which are in the country. So I wanted to make the point that this isn't going to stop, because of the situation that we have in the region, because of Greece's geography, because of the developments and the trends globally that we see. People will continue to arrive in Greece, and Greece will continue to be a destination country, something which it has become recently. So this investment is necessary at the state level. And I fully agree that it's not there yet. We're still at a point where if a tender is not finished in time, or someone contests it and it has to be delayed in recruitment, then you might have months without organized translation and interpretation in the sites, in the reception facilities, in hospitals. There won't be cultural mediation. This is true. In terms of training and capacity building, there are NGOs that provide it, but they only provide it to a limited number of individuals, and mostly to their own staff. If I take the example of our partners Metadrasi, without speaking on their behalf, they have regular training sessions. And in fact, they open up places for new interpreters to be trained. But there isn't a government-provided prospect. I hope that this will be addressed later in the day, since it is one of the deficiencies, and it's one of the primary focus points that need to be addressed. UNHCR does targeted trainings, but our system is focusing on very specific interventions. How do you interpret during an interview with a sexual violence survivor? How do you interpret when you're confronted with a survivor of torture? How do you interpret when you're speaking to a shipwreck survivor? In what context? In the context of the official procedure, the asylum procedure? Is it to establish facts of the case? Is it to create family links? You know, so many contexts, and this is why I wanted to give this, you know, maybe not so applicable at this present moment, but I think the idea of the conference is also to frame it more broadly, how to interpret in a critical situation. Here you have a plethora of languages, a plethora of individuals, and not enough professionals in the field to provide and care for something which can be a life or death situation. It could mean the future for the individual or many individuals. So I fully agree with you, and I think that this needs to be strengthened for sure.
Thank you very much, Boris. I think we'll have to leave it there now.
Thank you.
A very interesting keynote, and thank you for your questions as well. I think we've already hit on a number of issues that a lot of us would like to discuss today. And I think many of us here would have a lot to say on the tender processes around Europe, the criteria, etc., etc. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.